Aloha, everyone. Nice to see you. I'd like to welcome everybody to Hawaiian IANDS. I'm your host, Shaun Lether. I am thrilled to welcome our very special guest, Rob Schwartz, and his wife, Liesel Fricke. Rob is a hypnotherapist who offers Between Life Soul Regressions, a speaker and author of many books, including Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love. Liesel channels who she and Rob affectionately call the beings of light, and also helps people all over the world transform their own consciousness and lives through the workshops she co-creates and co-leads with her husband, Rob. You can download a free excerpt of Your Soul's Love at the link below, and you can also find out more about Rob and Liesel at yoursoulsplan.com. With that, welcome, Rob and Liesel. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Shaun, and thank you for organizing this and for inviting us. We're honored to be here with all of you tonight. I recognize some names, I recognize some faces, others are new. I want to start just very briefly with my own personal story. I know that a number of you are familiar with it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but for those who may not have heard it, I do want to introduce myself to you. And then I'm going to talk at length about suicide from a pre-birth planning perspective. I felt a real nudge from Spirit yesterday and again today to talk about that subject, which I take to mean that there are probably a number of people here whose lives have been touched by suicide. And if that's the case, I think you'll find the information I'm going to share hopefully to be very healing. So in terms of my personal story, believe it or not, I was actually in the corporate world for a long time, self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing different kinds of corporate writing. I did not enjoy this at all. I did not care for the corporate world at all. And things came to a head in 2003, at which time I was 40. And I had essentially an existential crisis about my life. I knew that I couldn't continue in the corporate world, but I didn't know what else to do with myself. And then Spirit intervened, and three very important things happened, all within just a few weeks of each other. The first was I had my first session ever with a psychic medium. She started off by saying to me, "Your spirit guides are here." And I said, "What is a spirit guide?" I mean, I'd never heard the term before, and she had to explain it to me. Then she said, "Your guides would like to speak directly to you," and she started to channel them. And the first thing they said right out of the box was, "You planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born." They then launched into this very lengthy and detailed monologue in which they explained to me why I had planned all of my biggest challenges. And what was really compelling about this is that they knew what all of my challenges had been without me telling them anything about myself, nor had I told the medium anything prior to the session. So as you can imagine, that blew my mind wide open. Shortly thereafter, I was introduced to a woman who has the ability to go into trance and channel her higher self. I had the remarkable opportunity to spend about 15 hours talking directly with her higher self, and her higher self told me in detail how we plan our lives, why we plan challenges for ourselves. Just a huge volume of incredibly valuable information came forward. And the most pivotal of the three experiences that occurred at this time, I had a spiritually transformative experience, an STE, in which I was doing nothing more than walking down the sidewalk in the middle of a weekday afternoon. And all of a sudden, every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for that person washed over me. Now, I call it pure, unconditional love because that's as close as I can get in the English language, but there are truly no words to describe this love. I could call it divine, I can call it transcendent. Those are close, but really there are no words that do justice to it. Every time I looked at another person, this love for that person washed over me. And you could say that I was caused to know. I was caused to know in this experience that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. I got that message loud and clear. What I didn't know at the time was why this was happening. That became clear a couple of years later. By that time, I had looked at a lot of people's pre-birth plans for my first book, Your Soul's Plan. And what I found in every case, no exceptions, every single pre-birth plan was based on great wisdom and complete unconditional love for every person involved. And this was true even when great challenges were being planned. It was true even when quote unquote negative roles were being scripted for people. It was always based on great wisdom and complete unconditional love for every person involved. And then I realized, aha, that experience walking down the sidewalk a couple of years ago, that was gifted to me so that when I found this result in my research, I would be absolutely certain that what I was finding was true. So that, in a very small nutshell, is how I came to do the work I do now. And it's a much more fulfilling life than the corporate world was. I feel like what I'm doing is uniquely me, that I'm really getting to sing my soul song in this lifetime, making a difference in people's lives. And that was really what I wanted to do all along from the very beginning. So I feel very grateful about that. Now, before I start sharing some things with you about suicide, I want to get a sense of who's here. If you would, raise a physical hand if you have lost somebody you care about to suicide. Okay. And if you would, raise a physical hand if you know someone who has lost someone they care about to suicide. Yeah, so that's a lot of people. That's almost everybody who has their camera turned on. So this is why I think I was being nudged to share about suicide with all of you. It's much more common than most of us realize. And I think what I will share with you tonight will be very, very helpful to those of you who have lost a loved one to suicide. So there's an entire chapter about the pre-birth planning of suicide in my second book, Your Soul's Gift. And let me set the stage here. The person I'm talking to in that chapter is an American woman whose name is Carolyn. Carolyn lost her only child, a son named Cameron, to suicide. And it happened just a few days after Cameron graduated from high school. So this was at a time in Cameron's life when his mother thought he was about to go off to college and start doing great and exciting things in the world. And instead, she came home and found that he had hung himself from a rafter in their attic. And she was the one who had to climb up there, cut the rope, and bring the body down. Now, she and I work with the channel in the Netherlands whose name is Pamela Krabbe. Pamela channeled Cameron. She also channeled Jesus. And I spoke with both of them at great length about Cameron's suicide. So at the beginning of the channeling session, Jesus comes in. And I ask him, is suicide planned before we're born? He says it is never planned as a certainty, but it is planned as a possibility, a probability, or rarely a probability so high as to be almost certain. And then he explains this was the case with Cameron. Cameron was bringing back into body unhealed energies from past lives for the purpose of healing them. And it was foreseen in Cameron's pre-birth planning session that these unhealed energies would cause extreme anxiety and extreme depression, so much so that a suicide would be highly likely, almost certain. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why in the world would anybody create a pre-birth plan like that? Well, you have to understand there are some key differences between your perspective when you're in body and when you're back on the other side planning a life. When you're on the other side planning the upcoming incarnation, you are very much aware that a lifetime on Earth is actually very brief. It's here and it's gone like a clap of thunder. You're also very much aware of the fact that nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. And you're very much aware of the fact that the wisdom that comes out of an incarnation will become part of you literally for all eternity. You may or may not know some or all of these things when you're here in body, but you do know them when you're back on the other side planning a life. So from that perspective, that a life is actually very brief, no one is permanently harmed by anything that happens here, and yet the wisdom becomes part of you literally for all eternity. From that perspective, it actually does make sense that some souls, not all, but some would take on very great challenges like Cameron did. Then Jesus steps aside and Cameron comes in. And I want to read you a little bit of what he says. And I don't want to paraphrase this because I think you need to hear Cameron's actual words. So he says, quote, "When I came here, I was bewildered and confused. I had not counted on an afterlife at the moment I took my life, but there were guides present beckoning me. I was very lucky to see them. I reached out to them and they told me what had happened. You're on the other side now, they told me, and I was struck with grief. They actually showed me my dead body to convince me that I was really dead. I wasn't aware of this as I was in a state of panic when I killed myself. After I crossed over, they took me to a place of learning and recovering. The first period of time was very difficult. I wanted to go back to Earth, to you," he's speaking to his mother, Carolyn here, "to my family and friends. I could not accept that it was so final. I was full of regret and bewilderment, and it was hard to find peace of mind." Now, you might ask yourself here, if it was foreseen in Cameron's pre-birth planning session that a suicide was highly likely, almost certain, then why is he full of regret and bewilderment? Why is he upset about it at all? The answer to that question is that when we first return to the other side, full memory of the pre-birth plan doesn't come back immediately. It comes back gradually. So he's speaking at a point in time here where he hasn't yet remembered that a suicide was foreseen as highly likely. So Cameron continues, "I often traveled back to you and my friends wanting desperately to talk to them, to let them know I was around. Some listened, others I couldn't get through to. Some I reached in the dream state. I certainly got in touch with you. We had some deep conversations with each other during the dream state. You were full of sadness and questions. My guides had to stand by me during those talks because I was so full of grief and sadness myself. I just wanted to come back to you and try again. It took a long time before I accepted that I had done it, that I had really left my life behind, that I had to start over again. In my talks with you, I tried to tell you that I truly appreciated who you are as my mother and that you didn't fail me. No one failed me." This is actually the single most common statement that people who have suicided make when they are contacted through a medium or a channel. They always say, "It was my choice and my choice alone, my responsibility and my responsibility only. Nobody failed me. Nobody is to blame." Always. Then Cameron steps aside and Jesus comes in. And again, I want to read you his actual words. It's never a good idea to paraphrase Jesus. I can't do justice to his wisdom, and actually, I don't think that anybody can. So Jesus says, quote, "Suicide is not wrong. Spiritually, suicide is simply a possibility, a choice one can make among others. It is not necessarily the worst choice one could make. Let me explain. Sometimes a person can get so stuck in a certain mood, a state of mind, that it is very hard to get out of it without taking drastic measures. Life is all about change. If you get stuck in one state of mind for a very long time, it becomes unbearable, and life itself will force you to do something, even if it means you take your life. While physically alive, he, Cameron, could not feel his love for his family anymore. When dead, he realized the full extent of his love, and from the soul's perspective, this was a great breakthrough. The suicide forced change upon Cameron, and in his case, it worked out well. It was a turning point for his soul. Now, why in the world is Jesus saying that a suicide worked out well and was a turning point for somebody's soul? There are a number of reasons why we plan big challenges for ourselves before we're born. But those reasons all have a common denominator. If you distill them down, the common denominator is that we are here learning lessons in how to more freely and fully give and receive love. That is the bottom line purpose why almost every single person is on the earth plane. Now, I mentioned that Cameron suffered from extreme anxiety and extreme depression. So much so that when he was in body, he couldn't feel his love for his family, nor could he feel his family's love for him. So the most fundamental reason for being in a body on earth was undercut in his case. But now, from the non-physical vantage point, where he no longer has anxiety or depression, he can acutely feel his love for his family and his family's love for him. This is why Jesus is saying it worked out well and was a turning point for his soul. So Jesus continues, I only wish to state that from a spiritual perspective, there are no acts that are absolutely wrong or sinful. The deepest act of self-betrayal can lead someone into a state of inner clarity that may help forever. The darkest point may become the starting point for a new direction toward light. You see, spiritual evolution does not proceed in a linear fashion. It uses the polarities of light and dark to create dynamics and change. In saying this, I wish to take away the traditional judgment about suicide that it is the gravest sin. God or spirit does not feel this way. God has the greatest compassion for people who take their lives in despair. There is always help available for them on the other side. They are never abandoned. So that's a little bit of what Jesus has to say about suicide. Now, when I'm writing a book, I try to be very mindful of the information that comes across my desk, because I know that if there's something I'm supposed to know about so that I can put it in a book and share it with all of you, Spirit will find a way to get this information to me. And this happened while I was writing the suicide chapter. I came across a wonderful book by a woman named Irene Kendig. It's called Conversations with Jerry and Other People I Thought Were Dead, which I think is a brilliant title. And what Irene does in this book is that she speaks through a medium to her friend Jerry and other people she thought were dead. In one of her conversations with Jerry, the subject of suicide comes up. And Irene shares with Jerry through the medium the following true story. It's a very simple story about a brother and a sister named Dan and Denise. Dan and Denise made plans to meet for dinner one night. Then, shortly before they were supposed to meet for dinner, Denise called her brother Dan and canceled. Then, during the time at which they would have been at dinner, Dan suicided. So now his sister Denise blames herself for her brother's death. She believes that if she just hadn't canceled their dinner plans, her brother Dan would still be alive. So Irene shares that true story with her friend Jerry through the medium. And listen to what Jerry says in response, because this is really quite extraordinary. Quote, even if she had dinner with him, Dan still would have had to be willing to create an opening in order for her to have made a difference. If he'd been willing to create an opening, someone, in this case Denise, would have stepped in. And even if she hadn't, someone else would have. Something as simple as a smile or kind word from someone would have made the difference. Everything is orchestrated. If Dan had needed someone's assistance to guide him in a new direction, someone would have been there. There is always a response to our needs. Had he been open to such a change, the universe would have responded to the opening. Now, I don't know what your reaction is to that, but when I read this, the implication struck me like a lightning bolt. So I took this into the channeling session with Jesus. I shared it with him just as I've shared it with all of you now. And then I said to him, quote, "This story seems to suggest that every suicide that could have been prevented was prevented. Is that true? If it is, this awareness would do wonders to relieve the guilt people feel at not preventing a suicide." And Jesus responds, quote, "All suicides preventable by outside forces were indeed prevented." I'll say it again. All suicides preventable by outside forces were indeed prevented. So what this means is that if you lost somebody you loved to suicide, there was literally nothing you could have done to prevent it. Because again, if that person had the slightest openness or willingness to change their mind, spirit would know and spirit would stage an intervention. So those of you who raised a hand when I asked who has lost someone you love to suicide, I would invite you now, take any guilt or self-blame you may feel and set it down and step away from it. That's what your loved one wants for you. And again, there was literally nothing you could have done. And for those of you who raised a hand when I asked who knows somebody who has lost somebody to suicide, please share this information with them because this can really be life-changing. It's pages 410 to 411 in Your Soul's Gift. So that is what I wanted to share about suicide. Just a personal story here that's closely related to this and the whole idea of spirit staging an intervention. Many years ago, I did a UK book tour, and I was somewhere in northern England, scheduled to give a talk, I believe, on a Friday evening. And 2 days before, on that Wednesday, and I only found out about this later after the fact, but on that Wednesday, there was a young Englishman in his 20s who was very depressed. He was sitting at a train station just a couple blocks from the place where I was going to be giving a talk in 2 days. And internally, silently, in his own mind, he was having a debate with himself, trying to choose between what he felt were his only two options in life. One was suicide. The other was to stake out an ATM, wait for somebody to withdraw some cash, and then steal it from them. That's where he was at. So depressed, so desperate, he felt his only choices were suicide or robbing somebody at an ATM. As he was sitting there at the train station debating between these two options, a mysterious hooded figure approached him and stood in front of him. And I mean literally hooded. This person was wearing a hoodie. They had the hood pulled all the way over their face to the point where he couldn't see any of the face at all. He was just shrouded in darkness. The hooded figure stopped right in front of him and said to him, "Don't kill yourself. Don't rob someone at an ATM. There's a spiritual study center 2 blocks from here. Go there, talk to people there, see what happens." So he did. Got up, he walked to the spiritual study center. He met the woman who owns it. She said to him on Friday evening, 2 days from now, this American author, Rob Schwartz, will be here talking about pre-birth planning. Why don't you come to the talk and hear what he has to say, which he did. And then we spoke privately for a little while after the talk. But my role in his story is actually very minor. The important thing that came from this is that after I left, the woman who owns the Spiritual Study Center took him into her home. He lived with her for a number of months until he got back on his feet, and then he left. I don't know what eventually became of him, but hopefully he has turned his life around. But the point being that because he had that slightest openness or willingness to change his mind, Spirit staged an intervention. And my interpretation would be that that mysterious hooded figure is most likely an angel that temporarily assumed human form. So that's what I wanted to share with you about suicide. Liesel, you want to take over?
Yeah. So, that actually makes me think of my own story. I went through many years where I was very, very suicidal. For those of you who don't know my background, I suffered for well over a decade from severe obsessive compulsive disorder, which was really debilitating. Just so much anxiety and so much depression. And, I think that probably in my pre-birth planning, suicide was foreseen as a high probability. But there were also other life plans, including the one that is currently, manifesting right now with Rob. So just as a side note, the way the beings of light have explained it to me is that it's like a stack of papers. You don't just have one life plan, you have a multitude of life plans, and they vary according to vibration. And so if you think of just a sheet of paper, the thickness of that sheet of paper is like a quantum sliver of vibration. And so as your vibration changes, as your vibration goes up, you start accessing, new sheets of paper, new life plans. So, but back to my my own personal story, I struggled for so many years with severe obsessive compulsive disorder. And I learned, I worked with a very gifted therapist, and I learned a lot of good skills in dealing with the OCD. And I also practiced mindfulness and just, really, really slowly sort of began clawing my way out of this hole of depression and anxiety. Then the pandemic hit in 2020. And my OCD was actually, it has a lot of different subject matters, but it was one of the strong ones is germ-based and contagion-based topics. So of course, everybody being thrust into a global pandemic, it was like, an OCD worst nightmare. And so at that point, the only option I felt that I had was just to surrender, I had started to experience in mindfulness, in, going into my body and going into and out of my mind. I had started to experience these little glimpses of, being connected to something that was much greater than myself. And these moments of, of peace and bliss. And so when the pandemic hit, I said, okay, there's no way I can navigate this, even with all the skills that I've gained. There's no way, this is orders of magnitude beyond my skills. So I'm just going to surrender to this energy inside, this source energy that starts to bubble up. And what I found as I did that more and more, and it was just a daily, almost all day practice of just surrendering and surrendering and surrendering. And as I did that, this peace would come, and these messages would come from what now Rob and I call this collective consciousness that lives in unity consciousness. We call it the beings of light. We call this group the beings of light. And so, I share my story, because I can now honestly say that I am incredibly grateful for having gone through all those years of incredible anxiety and depression and suffering, because I don't think I would have had the willingness to surrender to that degree had that not occurred. And I don't think that what I am experience now in life, and the rich life that now Rob and I get to share, and sharing, these messages with people all over the world, I don't think that would have come because I wouldn't have let go enough of my personality for that to come through. And so I share that because no matter what difficulty you're facing, there is always this potential for it to turn into like your greatest gift if you really meet it with acceptance and non-resistance, and you open up to those energies that want to come through and flow through you. I'm grateful that I stayed here, and I'm grateful that now Rob and I get to share all of these beautiful messages with people all over the world. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to, transform suffering into something that serves humanity. I'd like to share this channeling because this is the IANDS group, and this is one of the channelings from the beings of light that I feel is particularly appropriate for the IANDS group. This is called Rebirth While Incarnate. Often when there is a serious illness or a near-death experience, it can cause a kind of rebirth, a new lifetime within the current incarnation. This often happens because the event triggers a disassociation with the mental emotional structures that the person has accumulated throughout their lifetime, and a reassociation and a realignment with the soul and true essence of love and light that the soul is. Once the animating energy is removed from the mental emotional structures, they collapse or weaken significantly. And therefore, the same life lessons that would be necessary to bring awareness to the mental emotional structures that are at the wheel of your life are no longer needed. There is the opportunity for spirit to continue its evolution and undertake new lessons without the need to first dissolve the current physical form. While the potential peril or actual peril of the physical body often catalyzes these quantum leaps of consciousness, the possibility of shedding the physical body is not necessary for these leaps to occur. What is necessary that the prospect of death tends to elicit is a surrender of control and a willingness to perceive beyond the mental, emotional structures, a willingness to drop the very familiar and therefore comfortable association with these structures as being you, and a willingness to not cling to them tenaciously. When this willingness is there, it creates a space, an opening, which spirit immediately fills with its formless essence, with the energy that is ultimately you at the deepest level, with the energy that is also simultaneously all. To most personalities, this is generally a terrifying prospect, as it closely resembles death. It is actually a homecoming for the temporarily disconnected energy that has been allowed to run unsupervised through the mental emotional patterning accumulated during a lifetime. For it is now absorbed back into the soul and unity consciousness. And subsequently, there is a reanimating of the body with the energy of the soul and unity consciousness that then can flow unobstructed from the heart into the mind and use the mind as it was intended to be used, as an instrument for the purpose of expanding the vibration of love in the world. This is very different than before, when the mind and emotional patterning was essentially using the body to carry out actions based on a fragmented, disconnected, and trapped energy bouncing around within those mental emotional structures that had convinced you that it was you. The challenge is to retain this connection as you move forward in time, and to not allow a new identity to form that is based on newly collected thoughts and emotions, and to keep hitting the refresh button to source. Always know our love is truly with you, because our love truly is you. So in some ways, what happened to me during the pandemic was what they're describing. It was this kind of rebirth where there was enough pressure to create this letting go. And that's often what life challenges are about. They're about creating this surrender on the part of the personality, and this surrender of your identification with your personality structures, so that what and who you truly are, which is source, which is that unconditioned awareness, that pure love and light, which each and every one of you are, so that it has room to move into you and express in this world.
Well, should we take some questions?
Yeah, first of all, I just got to say, Liesel, I am so grateful, and I think I speak for everyone here, that you didn't commit suicide. And I love hearing your story of rebirth. And so I am so grateful to hear that. And Rob, you probably should add to your list, your resume of psychic, because my first question was all about suicide. And that was the number one thing that people had messaged me is about suicide. And there's several members here that are so grateful that have been sending me private messages, how grateful they are. So I'm so glad that you were called to do that. And let's go ahead and invite both of you on there. Great. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and people's, feel free to put your questions in the chat, but we're going to start off, since this is an NDE, spiritual awakenings group. Why do some of us choose, and do we choose to have, an NDE in this lifetime? And why would we choose that? And why don't other people? What do you guys think?
My understanding is that all NDEs are part of a pre-birth plan. I'm not aware of any exceptions. As to why somebody would plan that and somebody else would choose not to, there could be many, many different reasons for that. Probably many of you know the Earth and all of humanity are going through an ascension process. And as part of that, there's a worldwide spiritual awakening that is occurring. The plan for the awakening all along, amongst all the billions of us who are now in body, has been that the awakening would be led by a very small number of people. That would be all of you. You're in that group. And if you are one of the people who has that kind of pre-birth plan, then there are a lot of different ways in which you can spiritually awaken so that you can then help others spiritually awaken. Certainly one way to do that is to have an NDE.
Beautiful. Do you have anything to add, Liesel?
No, that was actually kind of exactly what I was gonna say. You took the words right out of my mouth. But yeah, it's definitely, it's a means for spirit to to awaken you while in body. And, like the beings of light talk about in that channeling, what the tremendous gift in that kind of rebirth, it is the fact that you don't have to shed the body. You don't have to go through the process of reincarnation and, starting all over, and growing up from a small child. You get to come back and have this, be changed, have this memory of the truth of what is really going on, and that this is all very temporary, and that this is the reality that's not real, that what you experience in the NDE, that's what's actually real. And so then, probably there's some challenge in coming back and having to, incorporate that and function in the real world and real society. But, another thing that's an aspect of this ascension process is that you as the personality don't have to figure out how to transform your life. You simply have to be open to the transformation, and spirit will bring it in and make it abundantly clear, and so you don't have to be able to see how spirit is going to use you in the world for it to start occurring. And, again, I'll use my own life as an example. When I first started getting these messages, I was sharing them with Rob, and then he was like, "Oh, can we put these on the newsletter? This information is great." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Okay." And I had let him put out one channeling in the newsletter. And then we were in talks with the Shift Network to do a course. They had asked Rob to do a course, and I was just participating in the meeting, just, in the brainstorming process. And I would kind of get things and I would share. And then they asked me, "Oh, well, first it's important to share that before this, on the change of the new year, I said to spirit, I said, okay, I'm going to stop sort of trying to block, slow this down. I'm like, you use me as you will, spirit." And so then this was a month or two later, we're having these talks with Shift. And then somehow by the end of that, I ended up teaching the course with him, which was to 500 people. And this was my first time teaching in any capacity whatsoever. It's in this genre or anything. And so I share that. I share that not because I'm special in any way, shape, or form. I share that because that is what, when you allow, that is what spirit can kind of and make happen. And I couldn't have made that happen, but what I did was not resist it, not block it. And that's all you need to do for spirit to show you how it wants to use you in this world at this time of transformation.
Shaun, if I could.
That's beautiful. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one more comment. I know that sometimes people who have had near-death experiences or have awakened spiritually through some other means or some other experience, sometimes some of those people feel a certain frustration or disappointment with family and friends who are not awakening. But again, the plan all along that we all created before we were born was that a worldwide planetary spiritual awakening would be led by a very small number of people, including all of us who are here tonight. Well, if that's the plan, then that requires a very large number of people to lag a bit behind in their awakening. So the people that some of you may feel disappointed in or frustrated with, from a pre-birth planning perspective, they're actually acting in service to you. They're making it possible for you to have the experience you wanted to have in leading a planetary spiritual awakening.
I love that. You somehow keep reading my mind when I'm going to ask a question and then you answer it, because that was the next question. So many of us are not here to wake up in this lifetime, correct? And that's not our plan. And that's okay, is what you're basically saying, correct? You know, that's...
I think for eons of time, the average pre-birth plan has been one in which a spiritual awakening was not planned, at least not as much of a probability. Now, this time period is very different. There is a worldwide spiritual awakening occurring, but again, it's being led by a very small number of people. However, in my observation, it's growing exponentially. And I think there are more people in body now with a pre-birth plan to awaken than probably at any time in history.
And you also can't necessarily judge where somebody else is on the awakening continuum at any given point, because a lot of times awakening happens through the personality just being like clinging on like this until it just can't take it anymore. And then it goes, you know, and then like this energy, that is greater comes through, that is the true essence of each and every one of us. So sometimes the people that you would think, oh, that person is never going to have a spiritual awakening, that might be the person that, you know, has finally hit their head against the brick wall enough to go, okay, you know, I give up. And, you know, and something, you know, greater comes through.
It's funny that you say that, because for me, it is that surrendering. You know,
Right.
I'm just one of those that was forced to surrender in the ICU on life support, but at least I did at some point. So thanks for bringing that up. So, okay, so the next question is, many of us are empaths. Many of us have dealt with narcissists and what some people call evil. So what do you think the role of narcissist or quote unquote evil people is in our lives?
So I've asked Jesus in the channeling sessions for the books about evil. And I remember in one of the conversations, I said to him, I personally don't believe that anyone is quote unquote evil, because if we say that somebody is evil, to me, that means that their nature is evil, and that means it can't be changed. And if that's the definition of evil, then I don't believe any being meets that definition. And he said, that is correct. There is nobody who meets that definition of evil.
Yeah, and so the way the beings of light have shared it with me is that it's not really good and evil. There is separation and unity. So there is going into extreme separation consciousness, and that's what produces what we call evil in the world. That's what produces, you know, people doing horrific things because they're in this state of extreme separation where they can no longer feel the humanity of another human being, or, you know, all of those sorts of things. But it's not evil in the traditional sense of the word, in that the core essence of that being is still love, actually. And another thing the beings of light have shared is that, and this actually came through when we were working on a future book that will actually contain a chapter on the Holocaust. And so that what the beings of light were talking about is what they described as the infinite elasticity of love. So one of the things we do here in this world is we test the limits of love. Like, how far, like, is it possible to break the love that you are, the love that I am, that bondedness of this love and light that is the essence of all, in the universe. Is it possible to take it and pull it so far that it breaks? And it basically is not. It's always being drawn back into that. There's always that pull back into unity consciousness. And even what came through is even someone as, an extreme example of evil, of course, is Hitler, right? But that soul, when that soul comes back, when that soul, it's stretch, when that soul eventually comes back, will actually give a great gift to the one, because it will have given this understanding that it is impossible to break the love that is the fabric of all of us. I hope that makes sense.
It does. So speaking of Hitler, do some people come into this world to help the rest of us wake up? So could that have been his role? Did he choose to do that as an example?
Rob?
Yeah, I'll speak to that, because I've asked specifically about Hitler in the channeling sessions. What was shared with me, believe it or not, Hitler's primary pre-birth plan was to be a great spiritual leader. And so his soul equipped him with certain gifts that were intended to facilitate that. Gifts of charisma, oratory, rhetoric, and so forth. There was actually a specific option in his pre-birth blueprint for him to use his artwork to spiritually inspire people. You might know he liked to paint and was actually quite good at it. But again, we all have free will. He apparently had an extremely painful childhood and chose through his free will to respond to the pain he was carrying by going 180 degrees in the opposite direction from what his soul wanted. So he took those gifts of charisma, oratory, and rhetoric and used them to do what he eventually went on to do. Now, the other question everybody always asks about Hitler, where is he now? What happened to him? What I was told is that he is back on the other side, and he is repeatedly recreating his physical death, which apparently was quite painful, as a form of self-punishment. So in other words, he's aware of the harm he did, and he is repeatedly punishing himself because of his actions. The important thing to understand here is that he's not being punished by God or any being external to himself. This is a self-inflicted punishment. He's surrounded by loving guides and angels and masters, just as we all are. They're all beaming love and light to him. He can't perceive it yet. Eventually he will. Eventually he'll move into the light. And then presumably at that point, he'll feel that he's got a lot of karma he wants to balance, and he'll start reincarnating again. That's my understanding of where he's at right now.
So in what you're saying is there is no hell. The only hell is us maybe judging ourselves.
There's no hell in the sense of it being an objective, ongoing reality sustained by the divine. But we are all an aspect of Source, of God, and we are endowed with the full creative abilities of God. So if you are someone who believes that you are bad, that you are a sinner, that you deserve to be punished, when you get back to the other side, you can easily create a hellish realm in which to torture yourself. And there are beings in such a realm. There are beings who have a specialty of going into those realms and trying to persuade those who have put themselves there to walk out. That's all they have to do, is choose to walk out. But because of the way they feel about themselves, that turns out to be a very difficult decision. There's a beautiful movie on this subject, which I believe is called What Dreams May Come. I believe Robin Williams is in that. Wonderful movie.
And so again, that goes back to this infinite elasticity or stretchability of the love that we are, so no soul is in that state of hellish experience for eternity. There is always this pull, this desire to rejoin the unity. And there's always this help from, guides and angels and masters to kind of help bring that soul back into the unity. But basically what that hellish experience is, that is the experience of extreme separation. And so, but even in that place of extreme separation, it's sort of like if I had a rubber band here, if I pull it this far, right, then there's actually this tremendous force that starts to be created. Even though this is way over here, it's always being pulled back to center. And that's the case always for all of us, is we're always being pulled into that truth of who and what we are, which is this infinite love and light that is basically the substrate of the universe.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. And hopefully everybody here who gets involved with politics is listening to all of this, because so we all have access. We all have these guides that are speaking with us, and it's us not listening, correct? What would you guys say about that? Like, we all have access to these beings, right?
It's that, if you think about it, like let's say there's it's like a radio dial. And so if you have a really loud rock station playing, then you aren't going to necessarily hear the soft, quiet radio station of the classical music that is also, that's also being dialed in simultaneously, that's broadcasting. It's just that most of us have so much noise in our consciousness that we don't hear that, that softer, gentler, energy. Or not everybody experiences it as hearing. There's all sorts of different ways to perceive the other side. You can feel, as an empath, you probably have a heightened feeling perception. So that's clairsentience. You can hear, which would be clairaudience. You can just have a knowingness of things. Clairvoyance, seeing things, but another thing that I think is also important is that you kind of have to trust what's given, and for then more and more and more to kind of open up. If you go, oh no, no, that's not spirit, that's just me making that up. If you dismiss it, then it's like you cut off the momentum of it, and then it can't just keep building.
I think anybody who's here as part of this call tonight is probably doing a pretty good job of hearing their guidance.
Yeah, they are, but you wouldn't believe some of the people here that I know that are mediums. A lot of times we second guess ourselves. And so people have been sending messages, also about friends who committed suicide and they didn't sense it and so forth. And I just think that's part of the human nature, as long as we're, because it seems like what you were saying, and what I know is spirit is more soft, but ego and all that other stuff is kind of loud.
Right. It's, and I don't know where this analogy comes from. It's not mine, and it's not the beings of light, but I remember hearing it, I think from Kim Eng, who's Eckhart Tolle's partner, about if you have a flute and it's full of mud, you can't play any music through it. You can't blow through it and create any music, and there's basically no room in it. But if you clear the mud out, then source, spirit, can play this beautiful music through it. And so that's really what a lot of it is creating space in yourself for who and what you actually are, which is part of that unity consciousness, which is part of that same energy that you're calling a spirit guide, an angel, whatever. You are actually a part of that being. To allow that to have the room to move into you and to move into your awareness.
Also, I think you can learn pretty easily to discern between the voice of the ego and the voice of spirit. For example, the ego always talks in terms of you should, you need to, you ought to, you have to, you must. Those words are the words of the ego. Spirit never talks to you like that. Your guidance will come in the form of aspiration, inspiration, joy, excitement. It's not a lot of shoulds and have tos and ought tos.
So somebody wants to know who or what creates the pre-birth plan. Is it ourselves or some other higher spiritual beings? Who's in charge of that?
My understanding is that the pre-birth plans are created by your soul in consultation with God's source, masters, angels, and spirit guides. So together they formulate the pre-birth plans. Then the personality is created. The personality is the portion of the soul's energy that will go into the physical body. The personality is informed by the soul and by the guides of what the plans consist of. At that point, the vast majority of people agree to the pre-birth plan. And one of the main reasons they agree to it is that when it's presented to them, they feel this overwhelming wisdom and unconditional love radiating from their guides and from their higher self. So there's a natural inclination to trust in the plans. But there's a very small percentage who start to experience human emotions like fear and doubt. Basically, fear or doubt that it's going to be too much. If you express that, then you're reassured by your guides and soul that these plans are for your highest good and the highest good of all beings. At that point, the vast majority who expressed fear or doubt now agree to the plans and they go ahead and incarnate. There's a small percentage of the small percentage who expressed fear or doubt who continue to express fear and doubt. If you do that, then the plan is amended until it's acceptable to you. So bottom line, nobody is forced to do anything they don't agree to do.
I was one of those that actually, I had second doubts. My poor mother, she had to induce labor because I didn't want to come out once I realized what I had planned. What about family karma, generational stuff that we hand down? What do you think of that?
There's a lot of ancestral healing that is going on in the current lifetime. I spoke the other day to a gentleman who, through sources of his own, knows a great deal about his wife's pre-birth plan. And he was telling me when his wife was a child, her parents were very physically and emotionally abusive to her, to the point where the father had steel-tipped boots and used them to kick this little girl in the head. So very, very severe abuse. And her plan was to come in and be a source of light in a family of darkness and help them to turn things around. And she has succeeded in doing that. You know, from the level of the personality, we find it hard to wrap our minds around this. And it's hard to believe that anybody would actually agree to such a plan. But again, a lifetime is very brief. No one is permanently harmed. The wisdom becomes part of you for all eternity. And we want very, very much to be of service. The intention to be of service to others is part of literally every pre-birth plan I've ever looked at. And in this case, this particular soul wanted to be of service to this family that had this long lineage of darkness and get things turned around.
You know, another thing that I'm going to share, because I just keep sensing it, is I think there are a lot of people on this call that are also star souls, which is what is a term that Rob and I use to mean, you know, somebody who has a strong connections to other worlds, other galaxies, lifetimes in other worlds, other galaxies. And there are a lot of us that have come here and incarnated at this time to really help with this ascension process, to help humanity, to help ground these higher vibrations. And many of us, and I'm getting chills as I say this, so I know it must be on point. Many of us, have chosen difficult families to be born into in order to help transform those energies, in order to help those souls transform that karma, to lift off a little bit of that karma as we heal those issues in ourselves. It actually helps those others in that generational line transmute some of that karma. So I sense that very strongly in this group, that there are a lot of us that we know each other from other worlds, other dimensions, and we're here to help transform this planet into what we know it can be, from having lived in these other worlds. And another thing that I think would be really interesting to share is, Rob, do you want to share your light worker story?
Yeah, so when I was doing the initial research for my first book and looking into people's pre-birth plans, I came into contact with a woman who channels Jesus. Now, she wasn't channeling Jesus for me. We were talking about something else by email, and she mentioned in passing that she channels him. So we exchanged a few emails about whatever it was we were discussing, and then the correspondence came to an end. Then several months went by in which I didn't hear from her. And then all of a sudden one day, I got an email from her, and it starts out, "Jesus has asked me to give you the following message." And then she proceeds to quote him. And he says, quote, "Currently, you are lumping the pre-birth plans of my light workers in with all other pre-birth plans. The pre-birth plan of a light worker is a distinct type of pre-birth plan. It would please me very much if you would make note of this in your book." Well, I was flabbergasted. The first thought that went through my mind was, am I really getting an email from Jesus? And then I thought, could it be that what he's saying is correct? So I dove back into the transcripts, and sure enough, he was spot on. I was lumping light worker pre-birth plans in with everybody else. And once I knew what to look for, it was easy to find. The key difference there is that a light worker chooses a particular mission, and then they immerse themselves in the vibration of whatever it is they want to change. That's the key thing. They're changing a vibration from within. The way they do that is by changing their own vibration first, and then it radiates out into the vibration they're trying to change. For example, we spoke a moment ago about child abuse. If you as a light worker want to choose a mission to do something about child abuse, it's very likely that you will choose to experience that yourself. The lack of compassion in the external environment is intended to give you both the opportunity and the motivation to go within, cultivate self-compassion, and then take the self-compassion and turn it outward in service to others. That changes the vibration of child abuse from within the vibration of child abuse.
So well said. Whoever, Kim, or whoever had your hand raised, just send me the chat. Just because we have so many people, we can't really, have everybody ask the questions. But so what do you think of karma? What is karma? Is there such a thing as karma?
Oh, there's a great channeling on karma. I'll send it to you after this, and maybe you can send it out.
Yeah, so I'll put it in Facebook.
It's like what Rob said, he hates to try to paraphrase Jesus, because it, always doesn't. I hate when to try to paraphrase the beings of light, but I'll do my best to kind of share the analogy that they give. So they describe karma as so when we come into this world, we're coming from oneness consciousness, from unity consciousness. And then we come in here into the world and we create ourselves and other, right? We create duality, me, you, good, bad, etc. And so it's like a teeter-totter, where at the center or the fulcrum of the teeter-totter is unity consciousness, oneness. And then, the other ends are one half of duality, the other half of duality. And so karma, they explain, it's kind of like, it's not a punishment, it's not punitive. It's like guardrails on duality consciousness to keep you from going too far off in one direction. So if you go off in this direction, you have the counterbalancing experience in an attempt to bring you into oneness awareness, the balanced state. But if you actually start cultivating that oneness awareness, that balanced unity consciousness on your own, then you can actually transcend or transmute a lot of heavy karma and let it go, because the whole point of the karma in the first place was to bring you into oneness, unity, awareness. So if you are getting there yourself, then there's no longer the need to play out the karma.
So Dolores Cannon, I believe she calls them backdrop people. Do people incarnate to be somebody they use the word space fillers, but have you heard that term by Dolores Cannon?
No, I have not. I've heard, now one thing people are doing right now that is vitally important, there's another channeling I'll send you. Right now, it's so important, the vibration that you're in. You cannot do much of anything in the world but be a frequency holder or vibration holder, just being that love, that force of love and light in the world, whether or not you're called to do a lot of things in terms of third dimensional action, you make a tremendous difference in the world. And actually you create action in others because you hold that vibrational state that allows others to create loving action in the world, those that are called to do action. I'm not sure if that speaks at all to what you were referring to as space holders.
I think it does actually a little
Okay.
bit. How are you guys doing on time? Do you have a little bit more time if we go a little bit over, or are you beat or okay?
I'm okay. I'm a late night person, Rob said.
How are you, Rob? You doing okay for a few more minutes?
I'm okay. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay. And and everybody bear with me. I am trying to keep up with all your questions. So back to reincarnation and do we get trapped in the cycle of reincarnation? I'm not sure what they mean. Maybe you guys do. I guess that would be
that's kind of maybe the wheel of karma they're kind of talking about. Yeah, I mean, like if you're moving from one end of duality to the other end, it's always it's always subject to easily being thrown off balance again. That's why it's really important to come into more oneness, unity consciousness awareness, realizing you the oneness with the other in a situation. And, therefore that just naturally elicits like more forgiveness and those sorts of things. And so then you don't have that, back and forth and back and forth.
My understanding again is that nobody is forced to come back against their will. But again, your perspective on the other side is very different than it is here. And if you felt you'd had past lives in which you didn't learn what you set out to learn, or you weren't of service in the ways you had intended to be of service, you would be very motivated to come back in and complete those things.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I like the way that you say balance versus, because a lot of people think karma like punishment or bad thing.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely not punitive at all. And in fact, it's kind of, I like how the beings of light call it guardrails on duality, consciousness. So that's kind of like, that's almost like a loving thing. Like it's just trying to keep you from going too far in any given direction in duality.
Yeah, isn't it funny how we as humans, we always want to think everything's a punishment rather than it's here to help us.
Right.
What do you think about walk-ins? Do they exist, and how do they fit into a pre-birth plan?
They do exist. I've met a number of walk-ins over the years. Well, for those who aren't familiar with the term, what happens is the soul that's in a particular body leaves the body. Either it's completed what it came here to do, or the soul has concluded it won't be able to do what it came here to do. Either way, it's time to go home. Normally, the physical body would die at that point, but there's a soul who's back on the other side, and whatever it is they want to do or learn doesn't require going through infancy and childhood. They can just start off as an adult. So a soul walks out, so to speak, and another soul walks in. This often is staged during an illness or an accident. So you hear these stories, for example, somebody is in a terrible car accident, they go into the hospital, they're in a coma for a few days, and when they come out of the coma, their family and friends say they're completely different. They have a different personality. It's like they're someone else. Well, that's because they are somebody else. There's a famous walk-in, you will all recognize the name immediately, and that is Saddam Hussein. Toward the end of the war with Iraq, Hussein was walking along a riverbank in Iraq. His soul walked out of the body, and another soul, a very, very high vibrational soul, walked in. Now think about the timing of that. The walk-in is taking place knowing that Hussein is about to be captured, imprisoned, tried, convicted, and put to death. Why in the world would any soul want to have that experience? Well, that is a remarkable and unique set of circumstances to learn all kinds of different things: faith, trust, compassion, unconditional love, empathy. The story I heard is that somebody from one of the US intelligence agencies was sent to interview Hussein in his prison cell. And then this person was interviewed on 60 Minutes. And he said something like, Hussein was completely unlike what I expected. I expected a monster. Instead, he was gentle, he was kind, he was peaceful. It's like he was somebody else. Well, he was somebody else.
That is absolutely amazing. Okay, so now a kind of tougher question that I know you're familiar with, but so what about spirits that come here, live a very short time? Some people have feelings about abortion and so forth. How does a pre-birth plan fit in with the souls that barely come here, and then ones that come here for just get their feet wet? How does that fit into a pre-birth plan?
My understanding. Go ahead.
On which of the books is the chapter on miscarriage?
That's in the second book, which is Your Soul's Gift. And at the end of the miscarriage chapter, there's actually a special channeling about abortion. The bottom line of the channeling is that all souls who are involved in an abortion experience agree to the experience at the level of the soul, not necessarily the level of the personality, but at the soul level, there's unanimous agreement that this is going to take place.
And if you think about it, it's whether we're talking about miscarriage or, or like something where not a lot of lifetime or the lifetime is only in utero, that's a wonderful way for a soul to dip a toe in the water of, at being incarnate on earth without, fully going through it. Because if you haven't had a lot of incarnations here, or you come from other realms, etc., this is an intense learning school, and so some souls want to just say, okay, can I just take the campus tour, but I'm not going to sign up for classes yet,
Yeah. And also sometimes they might come to help the mother or other people involved learn something, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, everybody who's got your hands up, please just put your question in the chat. We don't have time for everybody to. So how about if you could explain difference between maybe personality, soul, oversoul, higher self, and your understanding?
It's interesting. I think sometimes Rob and I use the word personality to mean different things. Because I sometimes when I hear him talk about, the soul putting part of its energy into the personality, that has a different meaning to me, because when I use the word personality, I mean like mental, emotional structures, or what a lot of people might call more like the ego, etc. I think so. Before we talk about those various things, what's important to realize is those words can mean different things to different people, and it's all about what it means to you as an individual. And so take it all with a grain of salt, in that these things are always they're only pointers, they're not really encapsulating totally the truth. Everything that we say in words is like a pointer to the truth within, which actually can really only be experienced, if that makes sense. But Rob, do you want to address the terms?
Well, again, to me, personality is a portion of a soul's energy placed in a physical body. I use the term soul, oversoul, and higher self synonymously, and I know that many people don't, but to me, those are the same thing. So I conceive of the soul as what you could call a spark of God or source, and then the personality would be a spark of the soul.
Yeah. There's another channeling from the Beings of Light called Frames of Reference. And in it, they talk about how, it's all about your frame of reference. And from a certain frame of reference, using terms like soul and, higher self and angels and masters and all these different differentiated things that is meaningful and is helpful and all those things. But from a certain frame of reference, all of that is actually meaningless, because we really are actually all one energy, one being, having this multitude of experience. So I think that that's something, to always keep in mind when you're trying to define, terms that are about, making differentiations.
That's very helpful. Now, and you may not want to answer this question, and maybe you should. What point do you think the soul enters the body?
Rob, do you have thoughts?
That question is answered in the miscarriage chapter in Your Soul's Gift. And you guys will laugh, because people always expect an author to remember every single word that they wrote, and it actually doesn't work that way. So I would have to go back and look up the answer. But I do remember a spirit saying that for a number of months, the soul comes and goes in and out of the fetus. And then there's a certain point at which it stays in, but I don't recall off the top of my head exactly when that is.
That's funny that you say that, because after an NDE, a lot of us, like myself, I think our soul is in and out of the body. Took me a couple of years to almost get in the body and stay there. So that, and I don't want to keep you guys too late, but this is so fascinating. And Liesel, make sure to send more of your channelings, and I will put them in the Facebook groups. And for those of you that are not on Facebook, just email me and I'll send you copies. Do you guys have any final words that you would like to share with everybody?
Well, one take-home message that I would like to leave people with, something Spirit has shared with me, is that there were so many souls who wanted to be here for the ascension. There were actually 3 times as many souls who wanted to incarnate as available bodies. So you had to make a 1 in 3 cut to be here now. And you were chosen because you have something specific to offer Earth's and humanity's ascension process. The reason I like to share this, I think it's human nature to feel small or weak, powerless, helpless, insignificant. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Every one of you made a 1 in 3 cut to be here, and you were chosen because you have something to offer the ascension process.
Yeah. And another thing I'll add is, well, first, if you want to read more of the channelings, you can go to our website, the yoursoulsplan.com, and sign up for the newsletter. And we often do include channelings with the newsletter. But another thing that I just want to say to each and every one of you is I actually want to thank you for tonight, and thank you for being of service tonight to humanity. And I know that may sound, big, but I feel it is very true, because, us all participating in this and this time where we're, talking about these important things, these consciousness expanding things, where we're all together collectively holding this higher vibration, it is actually incredibly impactful in the world. And you will, probably never know the ways in which that ripples out in the world, nor will I, but believe me, it does. It really makes a huge difference. And, all of you, there's so many lower vibrational unconscious things that you could be doing with your evening tonight. So I want to thank you for being here and helping hold this vibration and helping hold this light in the world. And thank you for being of service to humanity and to Mother Gaia at this time.
Oh, thank you so much. And when is your next workshop that you're going to have on Shift Network?
Well, our next one on Shift Network isn't until 2024, but you'll be interested. We're going to do a brand new one for empaths. Actually, we're going to do 2 courses in 2024. One is our kind of our traditional awakening to the life you plan before birth 7-week course, but the Beings of Light are downloading a new course, a 7-week course, all for empaths. So
yeah, sign me up for that. And I will be sharing it with everyone.
This July, we're doing I'm not sure which evening the empath workshop is. Rob, do you remember?
I don't recall offhand, but for those who would like to find out about your pre-birth plan and how you're doing with it, that's July 22nd. That's the Between Lives Soul Regression, the form of hypnosis I specialize in. We do it as a group. The intention is to get you in front of what we call your Council of Elders, the beings who oversee your personal evolution. And once you're there, you can ask literally any question on any subject. And if it's for your highest good, get an answer. That is potentially a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
And the details on that are on your soul's plan, right?
Yeah, yoursoulsplan.com.
Click on the events page.
Another workshop that we do, we don't currently have one scheduled, but I imagine we'll do one in the fall, is we do a Star Souls workshop. And that is the regression for that was entirely channeled from the Beings of Light. It's an amazing experience to connect, with those energies of home and like awaken to those gifts that you have brought with you. People have just had some really amazing, powerful, profound experiences. So if you resonate with, feeling that you have those connections to the stars, I highly encourage you to take that workshop. I have always felt that way myself. One of my earliest childhood memories was just having this complete knowingness that I wasn't from here. And that part I didn't question. The part that didn't make sense to me was that nobody seemed to be acknowledging that I wasn't from here like most people were. And so what my child brain came up with is that my parents must be paying everybody to act like I'm everybody else.
Yeah, you should come to our sharing group because pretty much everybody has felt like they didn't belong here most of their lives. So, and Rob, do you do private past life regressions and between life regressions?
Not past life, just between lives. There's an abbreviated past life that's part of the larger between lives soul regression. So if people go to yoursoulsplan.com, click on sessions in the main menu, the page will come up that will tell you all about it. And there's actually a 1-hour video of a between lives soul regression on that page. You can see exactly what it consists of.
So excited. And Rob, Liesel, are you going to be there on Sunday at Spiritual Awakenings International? Because everybody can see. Will you be there, Liesel?
I don't think it's just you, Rob, right?
Yeah, just me.
Yeah.
So Rob will be right before. We're still most things I now participate in, but there's still things. Well, that's exciting because you'll be right before the SDE Experiencers panel that I'm leading. So I will make sure to be there watching your talk, and so thankful for you both. This has been amazing. Everybody has absolutely loved it, and send more of those channelings, please.
I will. I've been like every time one is like, oh, that would be applicable. I've jotted it down over here, so I'll be sending.
Yeah, everywhere I shared it, people loved it. So.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, mahalo nui. I am so grateful to you both, and grateful for everybody for joining us. And everybody have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye-bye.